By the late 1960s, it seemed like the entire United States had been engulfed with the need for speed. Horsepower numbers kept climbing, and automotive innovations were advancing at a rapid pace across nearly every major manufacturer. Consumers were happy, and the automakers were raking in the dough. But even with the manufacturers pushing the envelope year after year, for some people, that just wasn't good enough. An increase from 350 horsepower to 375 horsepower on paper sounded good. But there were a handful of renegades who knew no matter what the big brands did, they could do more. And that is exactly what they did. Now, Carroll Shelby is the larger-than-life name that is synonymously associated with performance when it comes to American cars. But today, we aren't talking about him. We're talking about the four other men who aim to be the Carroll Shelby equivalents for the bow-tie brand at Chevrolet. These four horsemen of high performance each tackled the challenge of building some of the baddest American muscle cars of the era on period Chevy cars. But as you will soon find out, they would each do it with their own signature twist that would cement their legacy in the automotive industry. These men were Don Yanko, Joel Rosen of Motion, and Ed and Jack Stefani of Nicky Chevrolet. And this is their story. The best place to start this story would be with Don Yanko, who is often credited as being the Carroll Shelby for the GM product line. Now, both Yanko and Shelby were serious racing drivers that started their own performance shops and garages with the goal of building fast cars. Don Yanko was born in May of 1927 in the town of Bentonville, Pennsylvania, with gasoline running through his filling subsidy. Just a year after his birth, his father, Mike, would go on to open up a Durant car dealership. Now, unfortunately, Durant as a company would soon go bust, which meant that the Yanko family needed a new dealership pretty much right after they started, which they found by 1934 in the form of their first Chevrolet dealership. Don would end up working within the family business and begin his racing career by the time he got out of college and after his stint in the Air Force. By the early 1960s, Don was actively campaigning a series of Corvettes throughout various racing circuits. There was just one problem: Carroll Shelby. The new Shelby Cobras and Shelby Mustangs had burst onto the scene, and they were beating up on everyone. Yanko, now also a professional racer, hated seeing taillights and wanted to go on the offensive, and he would do so with the new second-generation Chevrolet Corvair. This new lightweight Chevy platform offered Porsche-like characteristics in an affordable package that could be easily tinkered with. They were quick and agile in the corners, and with little massaging, Yanko was able to turn these Corvairs into the Yanko Stingers, which cemented his name in the performance space. Following the moderate notoriety of these Yanko Stingers, Yanko began offering their own specialty performance versions of the new Chevrolet Camaro in 1967. Now, the premise was simple. Yanko would, for example, get a 396 SS Camaro ordered from Chevy. They would then swap the motor with a 427 cubic inch big block that they also ordered from Chevrolet separately. The key to this whole puzzle was that these were special order engines that the average Joe wasn't able to get from Chevrolet, which made Yanko the gatekeeper, so to speak, to sell these swapped cars as their own. All they had to do was do the actual legwork and market them. Now, a 396 SS Camaro was no slouch by any means, but when Yanko stuck an L72 427 in them that made nearly 450 horsepower, that was a totally different ballgame. For 1967 and 1968, Yanko had to actually pull the 396 and install the 427 themselves. But by 1969, this was no longer required because of Chevrolet's Central Office Production Order Program, more commonly referred to as COPO for short. Now, for the 1969 Camaros, Yanko could have the cars shipped to them from Chevy with the 427 already installed, which greatly simplified the process. They would do this for other GM midsize cars as well, like the Nova and Chevelle, throughout the late 60s, which drew widespread commercial success and notoriety. People wanted a piece of the performance that Yanko was selling, but unfortunately for Yanko, they were not the only game in town. Just one state over in New York, there was another icon building some of the baddest GM vehicles around. Enter Joel Rosen of Motion Performance. Now, Motion Performance was a New York-based performance shop that just so happened to be located right near the Baldwin Chevrolet dealership. Joel himself started his would-be performance empire from humble beginnings, working out of a Sunoco service station in the late 50s and early 60s in Brooklyn. It was there that he would begin specializing in performance work on customer vehicles. He split away from that service station and started his own shop called Motion Performance in 1966, which was right around the same time that Yanko was beginning to hit his stride as well. Joel would get acquainted with the ownership at Baldwin Chevrolet around this time, which was a Chevrolet dealership in Baldwin, New York, near his shop. They would combine forces to build their new Baldwin Motion supercars, starting in 1967 with the Camaro. They would give these cars a very similar treatment to what Yanko was doing, ditch the stock motor and replace it with a special order GM L72 or 27 or a host of other mods and changes that could be delivered with the car, like a new set of high-flow headers and mods of that nature. The Baldwin Motion cars, much like the Yanko cars, could be ordered new from the dealership with a warranty. Now, Motion over the years expanded their lineup to include Chevelles, Corvettes, and even V8-powered Vegas. Their cars were a bit more over the top in terms of visuals, and as the years progressed, they got bigger and more invasive stripe packages that shouted, "I'm here," way more than some of the Yankos did. And for the Baldwin Motion Corvettes, well, those cars got even crazier, with some of the top dog Phase 3 cars getting full front-end conversions that replaced the pop-up headlights with fixed ones. Heck, Baldwin Motion would even guarantee the quarter-mile times of their fastest Phase 3 supercars out of the box, saying that if they didn't beat a certain time in the hands of an experienced driver, that they would be eligible to be returned. And those numbers were at 11.5 in the quarter at a trap speed of 120 or higher. There wasn't a shred of doubt in anybody's mind that Yanko and Motion were building some of the baddest cars around. The Chevrolet horsepower arms race was on, and Yanko and Motion were both doing their best to capitalize on their ability to build the cars that Chevy themselves were too scared to build. What a lot of people don't know, though, is that during the heyday of Yanko and Baldwin Motion, there was a third GM-focused performance parts company who aimed to compete in the same sandbox as Yanko and Motion and win. Hailing from Chicago, Illinois, this company was the famed Nicky Chevrolet. Now, Nicky was established around 1925 as a normal Chevy dealer. It wasn't until the late 1950s that Nicky got into the performance parts business, so to speak, under the helm of its owners, the Stefani brothers, named Jack and Ed. Coinciding with their foray into the performance parts business, Nicky also made quite the splash in the racing scene with their race-prepped Corvette that was affectionately nicknamed the Purple People Eater, thanks to its purple paint scheme. This car was an absolutely dominant force in the SCCA when piloted by Jim Jeffords, who was its normal driver. In 1958 to 1959, in fact, the Purple People Eater won the SCCA Class B Production Championship for both years, which helped drive plenty of positive publicity for Nicky. And by 1967, Nicky Chevrolet was now parlaying this racing success and increased notoriety into building what they claim to have been the first factory 427 swapped Camaro out there for 1967. Again, this was the exact playbook that Yanko and even Motion were using for their first sets of cars. Purchase the L72 directly from Chevrolet using their connections, and then install those into Camaro's package for sale as their own dealer special models. Nicky, much like Yanko and Motion, expanded their production lineup to include an array of engine-swapped Novas and Chevelles. Now, one distinct swap that Nicky offered apart from the competition, though, was their DZ302 swap that was apparently available for the Chevelle and the Nova in period if one so wanted to purchase one. Now, stuffing a DZ302 into a Chevelle in particular, which had worse handling and a heavier curb weight than the Z28 that it would have came in, is pretty interesting. But nonetheless, it was still cool that they offered it. Nicky would go on to sell their fair share of cars just like Yanko and Motion would, and they would become a household name when it came to further than factory performance for GM products. And while this video focuses on these three particular companies, I do need to mention that there were a few other less documented shops that offered similar conversions for Camaros and Chevy cars of the day that need honorable mention, such as Berger Chevrolet, Dana Chevrolet, Fred Gibbs Chevrolet, and Cordia Chevrolet, just to name a few. So with all these names being thrown around and the demand for all these high-performance cars at the time driving record profits for these companies, whatever happened to them? And well, unfortunately, they all suffered the same fate. As fast as the muscle cars and pony cars exploded in popularity here stateside, they were also taken away from us just as quick. The late 60s arms race of power turned into a rapid drawdown by the 70s. America's love affair with performance was still there, but they weren't the ones calling the shots. A certain alphabet agency was, and their crusade against performance crushed the subjects of our story. Yanko transitioned into focusing on the Vega platform in the early 70s, trying to create a second coming of the Yanko Stinger with the compact Vega as this new handling-focused platform. This was going to be powered by a turbocharged inline-4 that would have helped the Yanko Vegas achieve a balance between performance and fuel efficiency in an era that required both. Unfortunately, though, they could not get the EPA to certify these cars with the turbo, and thus had to sell just naturally aspirated Vegas to customers who could turbocharge them afterwards if they wished. Yanko would then go on to build one more final car in the name of the Yanko Turbo Z, which we've done a full video on here, before closing up shop by 1982. Now, Joel Rosen of Motion continued to produce his Motion supercars and worked on his line of rather impressive performance machines until he was confronted by the EPA for trying to continue to sell emissions equipment deleted vehicles as new in 1974. In response, the EPA issued a grim ultimatum. Keep doing what you're doing and we will bankrupt you with fines. Joel made the only choice he could, and he stopped selling Motion street-ready cars. Now, he did build a handful of race cars designed for off-road use only, but overall, the company was basically dead in the water by the mid to late 70s. And a similar fate followed for the Nicky Chevrolet dealership and others. By 74, the last specially built Nicky supercar had been sold, as was the dealership. The original team at Nicky went on to start Nicky Chicago, which was a speed shop that would modify customer cars, which also closed its doors in 1977. Now, there has been a 21st century attempt to revive the Nicky brand along with Yanko during an era that right now is seeming to repeat history as we know it. Since the 2010s, performance numbers have been skyrocketing for American cars. Now, the base model GT Mustang makes 480 horsepower. And we saw the resurgence of cars like the ZL1 and the introduction of the 707 horsepower Hellcat. Aftermarket companies like Hennessy and RTR have come into their own over the last decade, essentially picking up the torch from where their spiritual predecessors like Yanko and Motion did so many years ago. But now, as we see the EPA pushing regulations further and further with EVs on the horizon, as well as the Camaro and the Hemi both being out of production, one can't help but think that the end for this second golden age of aftermarket performance could be coming soon. And with every fiber in my being, I hope it isn't. But one thing's for sure, when there is the ability to make a car faster, no matter the restrictions, we will figure it out. And that's the story of the men who built the ultimate high-performance Chevys of the 60s, the four horsemen of high horsepower. Thank you all for watching another episode of our Rare Cars documentary series. If you enjoyed this video, we would greatly appreciate it if you could drop a like and also share this video with other enthusiasts. Also, please make sure that you are subscribed to the Rare Cars YouTube channel and smash that notification